Welcome to everybody that we have trickling in. We got a few attendees so far. We'll give a few minutes to see who else is going to make it, and then we will go into our intro and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being patient. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully anyone else who's registered will trickle in, but don't want to keep you guys waiting from hearing from today's speaker. Thank you for joining the November session of Mental Health America's of Spartanburg County's educational series. We do, for those of you who don't know, we do these every other month and try to find topics and speakers that are going to speak to things happening within our community. We try to find a diverse range of topics and of people to speak and participate. So if you know anyone who might be a good fit, please share that with us in your post-event survey, or feel free to reach out to us at info@mhaspartanburg.org. Today we're joined by Aaron Brown, who is Executive Director of SC Shares. Aaron is a LMSW and a certified peer support specialist. And he is going to be talking to us today about some of the various aspects and special nuances of men's mental health. And guys, with Zoom webinar, as you can tell, we don't have everyone's video and audio. Aaron's used to presenting to interactive audiences, whether it's live or virtual. So when it comes to things that require audience participation or he wants input, excuse my cat in the background, please give us that through the Q&A or the chat function at the bottom, and I'll be monitoring it while he's speaking. Aaron, man, I will turn it over to you.
All right, guys. Well, good afternoon. Like Ross just said, I got set up here. I'm used to looking at folks and talking to folks and soliciting input as we go. Please, please, please interrupt with a chat at any point, and Ross will communicate your question to me. And with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Bum, bum, bum. All right, so today we are going to talk about masculinity and mental health care. Like Ross said, I am Aaron Brown. I go by Aaron, pronouns he, him. My background is in social work. I'm also a United States Army veteran, and I've worked across the field. I have a bachelor's degree in social work from Limestone, a master's degree in social work from the University of South Carolina. Formerly, I managed Bridges Clubhouse program for MHA. And prior to that, I've worked across the field from level 3 residential youth care to employment services with the state and suicide prevention with the VA. Again, if you have any questions, thoughts, feels, concerns, please put them in the chat and Ross will communicate those to me. And welcome. So let's define masculinity. Qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of men or boys. Okay, so we may use verbiage like that person is handsome, muscle, driven. So that's what we're looking for, what the common theme is in masculinity, right? It involves displaying attitudes and behaviors that signify and validate maleness. It involves being recognized in particular ways by other men and women. So it's a state of being, right? And again, this presentation is targeted on our Western views, but cultural similarities may arise, okay? All right, so masculine norms. Sorry. Current dominant masculine norms include providing for others, physical strength, emotional toughness, self-reliance, competitiveness, risk-taking, the protector, toughness and aggression, competitiveness, winning, dominance, virility, control, power, heroism, honor, and courage. Dominant norms, whether we agree with them or not, have been shown to hold influence over men and boys. So we see a lot of men want to put on that air, right? So men must be powerful, must be strong, must be able to take care of themselves, must be dependable, always on, right? So let's talk about toxic masculinity. And this is not a session where I want masculinity to be minimized, or I don't want it to, feel like it's a bad thing to be masculine, but there is a line with everything. There is a line between what is acceptable and unacceptable, okay? So being tough, there's nothing wrong with being tough, right? It's when we convey over toughness or we lack that insight to know when we need help, right? Aggression, not a bad thing. We want to be competitive. We want to be good at what we do, right? And aggressiveness in its base form is okay. But when we move into that toxic piece, it becomes limiting for both ourselves and the people we're working around and with, right? Our families, our friends, and things like that. Risk-taking, perfectly acceptable in small doses, right? So joining the military, right? Small dose. But then when we take bigger risks, like jumping out of an airplane with one parachute, right? Those are the kind of things that we want to examine. All right, so what is toxic masculinity? So this is seen as a subscale of hegemonic or the dominant form of masculinity, okay? Which can be defined as a manifestation of masculinities characterized by the enforcement of restrictions and behavior based on gender roles and the societal structure of the dominance of men. Okay, this is where I would ask you guys what that looks like, but I can't do that, Ross. So these norms influence the construction of ideal hegemonic masculinity representing socially constructed characteristics of dominant masculinity that men and boys must perform to be considered a real man. The set of standard and set the standard to which men are to be judged. Hegemonic masculinity is defined as a manifestation of masculinities characterized by the enforcement of restrictions and behavior based on gender roles. Hegemonic masculinity also serves to enforce the existing power. Go ahead, I have a tags. Historical or pop culture examples of that's a great question. So we look at cartoons, right? G.I. Joes, right? Things like that. We look at comic books, right? So we look at things like James Bond. So in its base form, it's okay to be, to identify with those characters. But it's also okay to not live up to that standard. It's an unrealistic standard. So think about X-Men and things like that, right? Does that help, Ross?
Yeah, it does. And our attendees, if you guys have any ideas or want to share for yourself pop culture examples or historical examples that come to mind when you think of a toxic, when you think of toxic masculinity, um, if anyone in the group has stuff they want to share while you're presenting, Aaron.
Yeah, please. Man, I wish this was interactive, Ross. It's hard for me. All right. So am I waiting? What am I doing? Sorry, Ross.
No, you're good. Go ahead, man.
Okay.
We'll roll on.
Okay. All right. Where was I? Defined by manifestation of masculinity is characterized by the enforcement of restrictions and behavior. So when we're talking about restrictions and behavior, can anybody think of something that a man might not want to show? And y'all can type in the chat, and Ross, you'll communicate that to me. I'll just hang tight for a second. Really, nothing? Oh my gosh. So crying, hugging, affection, intimacy, right? Being vulnerable with another human being.
Yeah, Aaron, what kind of stuff, through train in your role with training so many people to be peer support? I'm wondering, thank you, Brittany. Anything that makes him feel presented as weak? I think that's a fantastic answer. I say from my experience, like lived experience and working with clients and even coworkers and supervisees, anything that edges us towards seeming weak or feeling vulnerable, not vulnerable in the way that we tend to use the word of open, but vulnerable in the sense of I am at risk for something. Those seem to be some of the hardest things to cross. What have you seen in your work, man?
So simple tasks, when we do the training, I'll ask questions about what it is to be a man, and I'll list examples of things of whether or not they're manly. One of the biggest ones is sewing. Should men sew? It's a behavior that the traditional role has been female. And it's interesting to see people's responses. Now, I cheat because I am a former service member, so sewing is a skill I have, right? And I don't view that as a feminine activity. I view that as anyone can do it. So not just crying, not just being intimate, not just demonstrating affection, right? And we know these things to be, as counselors, I believe most of you guys are MSWs and LPCs, we know that these things are strengths. We know that a person being able to cry, being able to experience their emotions healthfully, it can be or is cathartic. It's hard to explain that to folks that have been raised differently or have grown to believe that real men don't cry, real men don't show weakness, right? Ross, I saw you your screen pop up. What's up?
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit to myself at your sewing example because so many things that fall into this category of things that are limited by traditional views of masculinity. It's just funny because like sewing is practical. Sewing is something that you need. It makes you able to navigate the world better. Same as cooking and things like that. So I kind of dryly laugh a lot whenever I look at traditional masculinity and the arbitrary boxes that it puts us in.
Absolutely. And then when Brittany typed him there, I was like, oh, I think she read my mind. So yeah. So I mean, there are those roles. There are those things that they are practical. So being able to fold your clothes, being able to iron your clothes, right? Things like that. They're practical things to know how to do that are viewed as feminine, that are not viewed as traditional male activities, but we know them to be. Yes. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Brittany. All right, this is where I would probably ask what is weakness to you guys? What does that mean to be weak, right? But I know that we're limited in our communication styles. So masculine attitudes considered toxic masculinity, which are a subscale, and we already went through this. Okay. The overall goal of toxic masculinity is to avoid appearing feminine and weak to others, especially to men. So we kind of get what toxic masculinity is, right? It's doing everything we can to avoid appearing weak. Now, does that mean we are? Does crying make you weak? Does being able to sew make you weak? No, and we know this. Our question is, how do we get others to recognize that as well? And we're going to get into that in a minute. Ross and I had a conversation about this shortly before. We've got to work through solutions. We've got to we know the problems. We can sit here and talk about violence. We can talk about assaults. We can talk about domestic or interpersonal or interpartner violence, right? We can talk about all this stuff all day long. We know where the deficits are. We want to be solution focused, and we want to look at ways to get over this. Excuse me. Okay. So self-reliant impression, men are less likely to seek therapy, and when they do, they are more likely to experience trouble in therapy. When they are experiencing depressive feelings, masculine norms can also be seen in rejecting physical health help seeking, including avoiding yearly physicals, avoiding doctor visits, or not treating injuries. So we all know that, right? We've all experienced that. Ross, I'm gonna go right back to our conversation because I laughed at it when we were talking. Rub some dirt on it. Anybody here heard that? Has anybody ever heard it? You know, you'll be all right. Just rub some dirt on it. Got a broken bone, rub some dirt on it, right? You feel bad, rub some dirt on it. We know that mental health plays into physical health. They almost mirror each other. How we feel physically is how we feel mentally. We all know about psychosomatic conditions, right? How the mind has domain over the body as well. Somebody that's experiencing high levels of anxiety might also experience pain in a part of their body where there is no injury, right? So many characteristics that are considered desirable in therapy are consistent with traditional feminine ideals compared to traditional masculine ideals. Clear expression and verbalizing emotions oppose the norm of self-reliance as well. I challenge this because as therapists, I think you guys have all seen this, where there is a boundary. No one comes to a social worker, no one comes to a counselor with the greatest days of their lives, right? I've yet to have that person come across my desk and just, feel like talking to me because everything was amazing. We see people at their most compromised. We see people at their most vulnerable. And by the time they've come to us, a lot of times they're already in crisis, right? They've come so far down a line that they are in crisis mode. How many of you have sat in an office with somebody and said, man, had you come to me 2 weeks ago, we wouldn't be here having this conversation? Has anybody done that? Has anybody had that inner dialogue? Safe space. No one. Oh my gosh. Of course. Okay. Who here thinks that masculinity, so let's think about our male clients. Who here thinks that played a significant role in their delaying care? I'm going to go with 100%. Yeah, absolutely. So that is what we're looking to combat, right? Our self-perception, our insight. And I'm not going to sit here and I don't think, full disclosure, I was raised in South Carolina, so rub some dirt on it was common. I served in the military. Mental health care was not an option. No matter how much we were struggling, it didn't matter. That would pass us over for promotion. That would put us into a job that was outside of our chosen fields, right? We could lose clearances and lose careers, right? So being mindful of that there's not just that, for me, it wasn't just that I didn't want help. It was that getting it would cost more than the hourly fee. It could cost me my career. It could cost me my friendships, my peer base, the people that I respected and cared for. And the kicker there was the people that I respected, I now know, and that I cared for, needed help as much as I did, but couldn't get it either. So when we're looking at masculinity, we don't ever want to look at the person and blame them. Now, we all have to accept responsibility. I chose not to get care when I needed it. And I can say that, as a peer supporter, I can confidently tell you, I waited till I was 100 moves down in the wrong direction before I actually accepted I needed help. I accept responsibility for that. We also have to examine the culture that I was raised in that stopped me or hindered me from getting care sooner. My ideals, my beliefs, right? Those things hindered me in getting care. I'm 38 years old. Do I wish I had gotten care sooner? Absolutely, every day. But no use crying over spilled milk, right? Where we are in recovery is where we are, and we have to accept that. All right, so let's talk about pressure. All right, so if we evaluate the expectations of boys, there's a lot of aggression and violence. Boys are acculturated to play rough and are often allowed to break the rules. The phrase boys will be boys is normalized by these notions. Adherence to these rigid masculine norms may lead, go ahead, Ross. Ross, you unmuted? Did you mean to? Are you there? Sorry. All right, let me keep it rolling, I reckon. All right, so we're looking at worsening of depression, anxiety, abuse of substances. We're at greater health risk for cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, issues with dating and interpersonal intimacy, issues with interpersonal violence, increase in overall psychological distress, discouragement in seeking help, and homophobia. Right? We see that a lot as well when we're talking about toxic masculinity. So not just, tasks that are feminine, but also sexuality, right? Judging folks based on who they are. Hey, had internet problem. Okay. And we know that if we've got folks that are struggling with depression, and we're all in the real world, right? So I'm not going to mince words. We see gun violence on the rise, right? Mass shootings. We see people being harmed and attacked for either who they are as people or maybe beliefs that they have. And to encourage boys will be boys when it comes to violence, when it comes to playing rough housing, when it comes to maybe teenage drinking, right? We look at this kind of double-edged sword where if it was someone's daughter, right, versus son, who is going to receive the bigger punishment at home, right? Your son comes home, they've been drinking. Oh, well, okay, you're in trouble. If your daughter comes home and had been drinking, what would the consequences traditionally have looked like there, right? When boys play footballs, when they play baseball, things like that, people get hurt all the time. Walk it off, right? And we're conditioned in that. We're conditioned in that we need to be overly aggressive. We need to hide our pain, right? We need to always be dependable. We always have to be the same. We can't be hurt. And the vast majority of trauma that we come across in this world, and what's interesting, is that it's not physical pain. It's emotional pain, right? It's that breakup. It's that rejection. It's that I didn't get the job. I'm not good enough. the emotional trauma is much more significant than the physical trauma. And if we're not taking steps to address that and to encourage help with our young men and boys, we're continuing this cycle where folks are not getting the help they need. And we're ending up with poor outcomes, right? All right, so let's talk about depression and suicide. Depression and suicide are ranked as the leading cause of death among men. 6 million men are affected by depression in the United States every single year. Men, 79%, die by suicide at a rate 4 times higher than women. And we're aware of these numbers. We're aware of these statistics, right? We know that men use more violent means, right? So maybe attempts aren't as high, but completion rates are a bit higher. All right. So depression rates are 50% higher in women than men. Suicide rates are approximately 3 times higher in men than in women, and are linked to traditional masculinity factors, limited emotional disclosure and help seeking that are disproportionately experienced by specific groups of men: gay men, rural men, divorced men, and unemployed or indebted, who feel they have failed in the traditional breadwinner role. Does that track with what you guys know to be true and what you guys have experienced in your fields? I'm just going to pretend in my head that you're all nodding, because that's going to help me. Yes,
You can
Aaron.
hear the nods. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say, y'all, especially if you've had contrary experiences to this, I'd be interested to hear. But yeah, the silent nods are loud.
So we see the deficit there, right? So when men are in distress, and these are the big life circumstances, right? So a close family or a death in your family, right? A move, job loss. So those big life events, right? Those big changes, we know have significant impact on mental health. How many people, see, I can't ask questions, and that's frustrating. Ross, I'm totally getting you back for this. You're gonna pay for this.
But throw them out there, and we'll give our attendees a moment to sound off in the chat if they're able to.
Brittany needs to get extra credit. I'm going to say that if we're giving out extra credit, she's rolling with it. So when something changes in your life, how many people have someone that's going to come to them? This is what how many people, when something happens in your life, come and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Check in directly with you. Does everybody have those folks? I hope you do. And if you don't, let me know, and I'll be your advocate. Yes. Sometimes, yeah. So we want everybody to have that, right? I've got folks, I'm very fortunate that I can say this. There was a time I couldn't say this, where something might happen in my life, and I have people that'll call me out of the blue who just hear about it in passing and say, "Are you okay?" That check in, that are genuinely compassionate and care about me. Not because it benefits them or not because it's the polite thing to do, but because they genuinely care. And when we're working with people, especially men that come in, do we think they have those people in their lives when something significant happens? And again, we're meeting with people when they're already in crisis. They are 10, 15, 20 steps into the game, right? Where we go back to that first question, where we think, man, had you come to us a week, 2 weeks ago, this could be so different. But are we asking ourselves the question, where is your social support? Where is the person that cares about you, right? And that can tell us a lot. What we don't know can tell us a lot when we're working with somebody. You lost your job a month ago, and now you're in the hospital because of a suicide attempt. Like a lot of people's. Yeah, Brittany, that's a wonderful point. Yes. Self-isolation. And we know that, right? We know that as mental health providers, one of the biggest indicators that someone's contemplating self-harm is isolation, masking. So we see folks, we see an increase in substance use, right? Absolutely. And there aren't people around that maybe are trained to spot those things and think, oh, they'll be fine. They've gotten through worse, right? Checking in rate. Yes. Y'all are awesome. It's okay to not be okay. Yes, Ross. Yes. Charlie. A lot of my good friends. Charlie, that is awesome. Yes. Yes. And we're going to talk about social media. I love that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up. And I want everybody to think about echo chambers, right? Are you guys all familiar with what that is? I'm sure by now everybody is familiar with an echo chamber. Um,
Thankfully, the room you're presenting in isn't one because we haven't heard your echoes the whole time.
Again, I'm just pretending everybody is nodding and like, man, this guy is so smart, telling me all the things I didn't already know. Everything is specific. Yes. You guys are on it, man. So we want to normalize that, right? And we don't, it's easy for us. It's easy for me to sit here and say, it's okay to not be okay. I'm here to talk. I want to talk to you. We need to find ways to encourage communities to accept that, right? We need to find ways to encourage, especially the men in our communities, to accept that it's okay to not be okay, and that it's okay for people to get help, and it's okay for them to get help. And this is not a male or female issue. Who are the worst patients? Doctors, right? And then who are some of the last people that would seek mental health care, which is shocking, are people that work in mental health. So we're bad about this. Yes, there we go, Brittany. Yeah. So we're over here kind of the pot calling the kettle black, right? We're saying, oh, men don't want to get help. But then I have to look in the mirror and say, man, I don't really want to get help either. Go ahead, Ross.
What do you think that is? I think there might be a corollary there between why do mental health professionals some of the last people to reach out, and why it is for men. Like I got my theory. I'm curious on yours.
We're in the kind of in the same boat as I do this for a living. I've got to be good at this. But I think it's simpler than that, Ross. It's that if Brittany, I'm using you because your name keeps popping up and you're awesome. If I need help and I go to Brittany, Brittany and I are going to cross paths at some point. And I will speak to this from experience. Again, I'm a peer supporter guy, so I'm encouraged to share my story. I received therapy through the VA, and I'm not going to say who, but I will say that my therapist is a social worker, right? And we went into this with the understanding that we may cross paths at some point, and not, we've been working together for about a year, and we did at an event, and we kind of both just looked at each other, nodded, and kept it moving, right? Didn't say anything. We just kept it going. When we get help from another mental health professional, we know the game, we know the tricks, we know the interventions, we know the research. What's most profound is we know a lot of the people. So being mindful of that, and as a counselor yourself, being open to the idea, would you be able to work with a colleague? And maybe not somebody that you work in the same office with, right? But someone that you may cross paths again. Oh, are you really, Brittany? That's why you're so awesome. What the junk here? Russ.
See, man. So you didn't tell me that you were getting into tribalism and you were bringing your own folks to bash us who are not CPSS. But I see how it is. You got a plant. All right.
Hey, we're out there. We are doing it.
Yeah,
It's
I
in,
think a lot of that resonates. It's funny because as a practitioner, a lot of us would probably say or think like, well, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing a therapist, having a therapist as my own client, and being able to support that way. But when the roles are reversed, it feels different. And there's logistical things, like you said, and we always run into the, well, how do you find a good therapist? Because if you know them, then it's too close, and if you don't know them, you don't know if they're any good. But I think an overlap with that I see between this and masculinity is it can feel like admitting to weakness, and also looking at something and saying, well, what is this going to add to my toolbox I don't already have, which ties into a perspective that I should be able to do better and I'm not.
Absolutely, Ross. I view it as I can't sell something I'm not willing to buy. If I'm not willing to buy therapy, if I'm not willing to buy therapy, then what gives me the right to try to sell it to other people and tell other people that it's a good thing? And one of the most profound things I've heard when it comes to our field, I know this is off track and we need to get it back on. The key to a good social worker is having a good social worker. So the key to being a good therapist is having a good therapist, right? Should good, yes, Brittany. All right, y'all rock, man. All right, so we know what stigma is, right? I think I'm preaching to the choir here again. So related stigma is an umbrella term. It includes public self-stigma, professional stigma, and cultural stigma. Social stigma refers to negative attitudes towards and disapproval of a person or group experiencing mental health illness, rooted in misperception that symptoms of mental illness are based on a person having a weak character. These perceptions can lead to discrimination, avoidance, and rejection of persons experiencing mental illness. We know that, right? We know that it's attitudes that are defined by whatever culture or what predominant feeling is out there, right? All right, so let's talk about some illness contributors. So we've got social media. Charlie, I think you brought that up a minute ago. Social media. Or was that you, Ross?
No, that was Charlie. Yeah, Charlie brought it up in the chat. I was just going to say, Aaron, what do you mean body dysmorphia in men? That's not a thing.
Oh, yes, eating disorders, right? And we ignore this. We ignore this a lot. So we go back to what the definition of masculinity, right? So that person is muscular, they're built. And then we go on social media and we see all these men with, 16 pack abs, right? That can bench press 600 pounds, right? Think about what that does to a young person. Now, women, we've seen this over and over again, right? 16 pack. Well, you got to add 10 more. We've seen this over and over again with women, right? And girls, so girls and women. The prevailing body type was very slim, tall, all that stuff. And we've seen eating disorders throughout that population. We're seeing it more and more with men now, thanks to social media. And less are reporting it. When we're talking about dysmorphia, not only are we talking about things like binging and purging, restricting diet and things like that. Can anybody think of the other thing when we're talking about 16-pack abs? Does anybody know what it takes to get 16-pack abs?
Dietary restriction.
That, and you got to add something. What are we seeing an uptick? Genetics, yeah. But what helps augment genetics and all of everything?
Steroids.
Steroids. That's right. We're seeing an increase in steroid use and abuse. being mindful of that. Now, we know that drug use just at its most base form is detrimental, right? We know that a 16-year-old consuming alcohol and marijuana and cocaine, that's not good. What about when we add in steroids to a developing body? When we're encouraging maleness as being this massive human being that can bench press a house, right? So managing social media consumption is huge, and also challenging what the ideal body type is by accepting who we are as we are. It's great to be healthy. It's wonderful to be slim. They see that. Let's see here. Compensation. Yeah, ego. Yes, when we go right back to that toxic piece, right? If I don't look like the person I admire, I'm not good enough. If I can't bench press 500 pounds, I'm not good enough. What's the problem with thinking that way? It's self-fulfilling, right? You bench press. So what happens when you bench press 500 pounds? Negative self-talk. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And even when you hit the goal, empty. And even when they hit it, Charlie, is it filled? Is it somehow full? Does your life get exponentially better because you can bench press whatever? Yes, Ross, yes. Battlefront, yes. Always moving the goal. Oh, yes, yes, yes. You guys are on it. Absolutely. So we're constantly feeding that ego, and that ego is never full. We never hit the market or hit the mark that we're going for. The only way to do that is to accept who we are. I'm not the strongest. And this is speaking from Aaron Brown. I am not the strongest. I am not the smartest. I am not the most clever. I just can't be. I can accept that. I can accept that there are folks that know more than I do. I can accept that there are folks that are stronger than I am. I can accept that, right? But I accept me too. I'm okay the way I am too. With social media, it's that message is harder and harder to get out. Okay. We are influenced by our immediate communities. Yes, accept our limitations. Thank you, Ross. Yes. Our immediate community dictates our feelings and influences our feelings and the way we look at ourselves. Our culture in our workplace, right? Or the type of work we do. So we just talked about in the military. Let's talk about the trades industry, right? The first responder industry or the first responder field. Those things are frowned upon or can be. I'm not saying they always are. And I shared a story with Ross earlier, was that we had an agency, private small company, who recognized a need in their community, who recognized that the majority of their employees, who were men, were also recovering from alcohol, substance use, and mental health disorders. They identified that need themselves and sent one of their employees to become certified as a peer supporter to help their workers or help their workforce, which I just think is the coolest thing. We're talking about a small business. We're not talking about, a large entity struggling with an image issue. We're talking about a small business owner whose margins are already thin, who still wanted to provide some level of care to their employees. Go ahead, Ross. I'm sorry. Ross, you there?
Yeah, I'm back. My internet's still giving me trouble.
Oh, okay. Self-perception. We go right back to that social media piece, right? When we're always comparing ourselves to someone else, we're never going to be able to accept that we're good enough. Level of insight and self-awareness. Our age, our race, our backgrounds can all contribute. Don't worry, I think there's some good news coming up. All right, not yet though. So in the exposition of the dark side of masculinity, posited that traditional masculine role socialization produces a wide range of interpersonal patterns and behaviors that are profoundly harmful to society and men themselves. So we see unnecessary risk taking. We know that jumping off of a bridge that's 100 feet tall is a bad idea, right? We can all accept that. In this room, we can accept that that's a bad idea. But maybe we shouldn't do that, right? A 16-year-old might not. They might see that as they're going to get some social media clout, right? Aggression. So we see that. And again, I want to use references and I want to use things that you guys we're all familiar with and has really demonstrated and highlighted the issues. When we go back to TikTok videos, right? We see people getting into fights over small things, right? Or what you or I may perceive as small things. We see avoidance of negative feelings. So we see, substance use and alcohol use. Profound fears of rejection, so much so that people completely withdraw from community and become loners. Bullying. So we know what bullying is, right? Poor communication. Severe difficulty with interpersonal intimacy. So into me, I see, right? Weakness is how that's perceived, is to be being intimate with the people in your lives and being genuine and authentic.
Aaron, looking at all these individually they're all difficult on their own, and then thinking about the intersectionality and connectiveness of these things when you're experiencing multiple of them at one time. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to be more avoidant if I have fears of rejection, and I'm not good at intimacy because I don't have the skills for it, and that's going to lead to me being more frustrated and aggressive and doing those things to try to numb that. Like, yeah, it's a big old circular causality pattern.
It does. It compounds. Thank you for that, Ross. Yes. It's a compounding issue. It's not just I'm aggressive, right? We didn't start with aggression. We started with I don't know how to be intimate with another human being. Now, when we use the word intimate, well, I try to be mindful of that. I know that this space, you guys understand what I mean. We don't mean intimate in the sense of, a traditional relationship, right? So, you with your wife or husband or whoever, or your significant other, we can be intimate with our friends. And intimacy is just being yourself, being honest, communicating your feelings, communicating your thoughts, communicating your needs, your wants, your desires, right? Having people in your circle that know who you are. So when we say intimacy, I know a lot of folks back away, say, oh, no, nah. But we're intimate with more people than maybe we think we are. When we have difficulty expressing ourselves and our genuine selves with other people, we do find ourselves avoiding, right? We do find ourselves struggling with more of those fears of rejection. And we might find ourselves, drinking or using substances more frequently. You have it? Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ross. You put that much more eloquently than I could have. I'm so guarded, y'all. All right. Usually the silent ones are the ones that need their voices. Ah, Charlie, yes. I'm not even, Ross, come on, become one. Absolutely, Charlie. Yeah. So the folks that are quiet, that sit in the back of the room, they have the most to say. And we know that, right? We know that as practitioners, we know that as human beings. But then again, the person with the most bravado, they might need some help too. Right? But yes, we generally see that. If you look in the classroom and you see the person hiding behind the hoodie, We see the person who avoids eye contact at all costs, right? Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about application for future work. Did I go one ahead? I think I did. I don't know what I did here. No, we didn't. Okay. So see, here's some key recommendations for progressing toward a society that is attuned to the health disparities that are experienced. So obviously, mental health providers should review the APA guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men to explore the complexity of masculinity and work with males, develop policies for providing mandatory cultural competency training to physicians in medical school that are not just primary care settings, develop and implement public stigma reduction campaigns with male-driven committees and community representatives. And I'm going to bounce right back to that in a second, okay, guys? Diversify the pool of mental health providers in urban and rural areas, increase diverse role models of positive masculinity. Now, I know you guys read that third bullet point and were like, what is he talking about? A lot of the committees that I have sat on that are targeting the male community are female driven. Now, that is not a problem at all. But when we're talking to men and we're trying to challenge these masculine attitudes, men are going to be some of the better conduits to reach those communities, because I can walk in. It's one thing for I'm gonna name drop. I'm gonna use Lavinia. She's my training director. It's one thing for Lavinia to walk into a locker room and say, "All right, guys, I'm here to talk about mental health," versus me walking into the same locker room and saying, "All right, guys, mental health is okay." Right? We're selling the same product, but we're two different types of consumers. I know what it's like to be in that locker room, to struggle with depression, to think about harming myself or taking risks or using, and knowing that I have no one in that room that I can talk to about it, knowing that I can't go to my coach, I can't go to my peers and talk about this stuff because I'm not a man. But what if a man had walked into that locker room and said, "It's okay, right, yes, Brittany, representation of lived experience matters." Absolutely. Absolutely it does. But what if a man had walked into that same room, right, and said to me, "Hey, anybody here struggling? It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to come talk to me." Right? So when we're putting together these committees and we're talking about these initiatives, the faces of these initiatives need to be men with lived experience, men that know what it's like to not be able to get help, men that represent their communities. Just as simply as a hetero man, as a hetero cisgender man, walking in and trying to talk to our gay and bi, our LGBTQ community, I can't speak to that, right? We need somebody that is a representative of that community to speak to that community. I can't walk into a Black or brown environment and speak to mental health care and what it's like. I don't have that experience, right? Being mindful.
You're saying you don't think you'd be the best representative to go talk to like a high school volleyball team in their locker room about mental health?
We'd send Brittany for that.
Brittany's got it.
Yeah. Being mindful of our population, being mindful of who we want to help and how we can best help them. Now, is that to say that I can't be a therapist or a peer supporter for someone that's a member of the LGBTQ community? Absolutely not. No. What I'm saying is if there is a barrier there, then a member of that community should help address that initial barrier. If we want to encourage men to come to therapy, more men need to be involved and engaged in this process. More folks need to be aware of how detrimental it is to put off mental health care. And we watch it every day. We've watched it over and over again. We see, mass shootings. We see, mass violence because care was either not available or never sold to them. And it's not hard to see the gender and race of the majority of folks who are doing these things. We know that it is dangerous for young men to not get care. It is sad to see schools. It is sad to see concerts. It is sad to see bowling alleys, right? And how much more of that are we willing to look at? How many more times do we as providers, how many more times can we see that and think, had you come into my office a day before, I could have helped you? It's bigger than we want people to accept themselves. It's bigger than that. Our jobs save lives, and targeting communities with the appropriate representatives can save lives, not just that person's, but so many others. We never see the outcome of our work. You guys know that, right? We never get to see the outcome of our work. And that's hard. That makes it difficult for us to stay motivated. But know that peer supporters, when you guys see peer supporters, we are representatives of your work. If you ever wondered if you ever helped anybody or if anybody in our profession has helped anybody, give me a call. Right? Give Brittany a call. We demonstrate that what you do matters. I wouldn't be where I am right now without social workers, without counselors, without doctors, without men telling me it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to get help. All right. So let's talk about some clinical considerations. We know that not two people are all the same, right? So we need to keep that in mind. Some of the issues that we may come across when we're working with men, it's going to be embarrassment or perception of weakness when accessing mental health care. People are going to feel vulnerable when they walk into our office, right? Or when they come to us. This is one that I was shocked to hear, but I want you to have it on your radar. So I did a little bit of community research, I guess we'll call it, with some folks who traditionally put off care. Time commitments. So we talk about those traditional masculine roles, right? We got to be the biggest, baddest, strongest all the time on, right? Always be making money, right? They may communicate time commitments that may interfere with them being able to access care. So them making it to your office was a significant commitment. And when they're there, we need to take that seriously, that they are likely sacrificing not just whatever your fees are, but they're also sacrificing time on the clock to be there. Okay. They may struggle with perceived judgment. This is another one. Depending on the person's issues, a part of masculinity can be healthy, but yes, it's easy to determine. I can't take this. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Ross. Know that there are issues that maybe men are dealing with that they feel more comfortable working with another man on. So some of the issues that were directly communicated to me were issues with their spouse or issues in their relationships. So asking about that is important. And we'll get to this in the next slide, but this would be something to keep in mind, okay? Also, family values. And we talk about this all the time in the training, medication side effects. Does every illness require medication, guys? I see everybody's head shaking now. Yeah. I'm sensing it. No, not all illnesses require medication. So explaining that, right? Letting folks know that that's not always the case. Okay. So let's work around them. We can use examples of other men in pop culture who have received mental health care. We can offer alternative options and flexible times for appointments, maybe taking away late or cancellation fees. Instead of saying you've got to be here at 11 o'clock and you're going to be billed if you're not here by 11:15, maybe say, look, I've got 11 to 12 open. When you get here, we can work with that. Maybe we say, okay, so maybe we need to do remote appointments, Zoom appointments. Take away some of those barriers that are self-imposed, not by you, but by them. Take away some of those excuses, disarm them a little bit. All right. Learn about the person's issues prior to assignment of a therapist and ask about his preference and gender of provider. Ask these questions, okay? Ask what's going on and who they might be more willing to work with. Be mindful of any microaggression that you may have, okay? So be mindful of rolling your eyes. Be mindful of the change in tone, right? Keep that in mind because those microaggressions can be picked up on. And for somebody that's already hypersensitive to maybe even reaching out for this help, they're going to be hypersensitive to the way you communicate, the way we communicate with them. Brittany knows this. Peer supporters are great, not only because we're willing to disclose what we do, but we're also willing to disclose some of the tricks of the trade. We were patients at one time, and I know exactly what to tell a doctor or a counselor to get them off my back. 100%. Not the way you say, it's how you say it. Yes, 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 absolutely. Charlie, thank you. Absolutely. Keep that in mind. Know the community in which you serve. Know the biases held in your community about mental health care. You can meet with people in your community and see where they stand on these things, right? Take the time to review medication options with your client. So if medication is something that comes up, number one, we can communicate that not all illnesses require medication. But if it does, if you do, here are, let's talk about the side effects that you're worried about. Men are likely going to be worried about weight gain. They're going to be worried about stigma associated with taking a medication and their sexual health. So virility, we've already challenged those three things earlier. We know that body dysmorphia, we know that stigma, and we know that virility are big things when we're talking about toxic masculinity. All right. And that is the end of my show, y'all. Let's see what we got. I found that medication is a big hurdle for a lot of guys because it feels weak.
Yeah, like I should be able to do it without it. I don't want to take this other thing, put it in my body. It sort of feels like an extra level of admitting like weakness. That has been my experience with people, friends and clients. I want to. You're on the spot on this one, man. So no worries if you don't have anything, and we'll see if our attendees have anything they'd like to add. But I asked that question about like toxic or unhealthy masculinity that we see represented. Have you bumped into anything like, say, pop culture, or whether it's someone like the person you mentioned to me before the show who is using their platform to espouse this kind of stuff, who is a positive example of masculinity? One that popped in my head because I'm looking at a sticker on my laptop is Ted Lasso.
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen that, but I like that. What I've seen at the show, I haven't seen it all, but I feel like it does a good job of showing a guy who cares about the people around him and shows up, but does it in ways that might not be traditionally masculine, like baking.
absolutely. So like we were talking about earlier, so Fetterman, right? Senator, he struggled with depression. He struggles with depression, was recently, or not recently, but was hospitalized for psychiatric issues and has been very open about that. And when I think of leaders, when I think of folks who hold dominion over and sway and influence over other folks, I like to think that. I like to think that mental health plays a big part in their decision making, not only for themselves, but for those that they're making decisions for. What do you guys think? We get into dysmorphia. I want to go right back to that because I feel like that was the easiest way to gauge that, guys, is look at G.I. Joe. Okay. Look at the physique of a 1960 G.I. Joe to a 2023 G.I. Joe.
What's the change?
It went from a general form of a military man to the guy with the 16-pack abs. And that's a doll. That's toy. Right? Think about what that does to a young boy. So when my son plays with toys, thank God he only plays with Matchbox cars. So I don't know, he just wants to be a race car driver. So being mindful of playing with G.I. Joes and dolls and things. And even for my daughter asks me all the time about Barbie. I say, Barbie's garbage. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I'm just trying to sell you something that doesn't exist. And it's the same thing with G.I. Joes. When we're talking to our young men, it's garbage. They're trying to sell you something that doesn't exist. I'm very grateful for the women in my life. I will say this, and I don't want this to feel like I'm just talking about men, because there are women in my life who've really challenged me to think. And I'm going to give you guys this example. I remember as a little boy watching Baywatch. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Baywatch, and I saw a bunch of eyes roll just now. It comes on, and my brother and I are sitting there watching it, and my grandmother and my mom were on the couch and we're watching it. And I'll never forget this. My grandma taps my mom and says, "That's not what real women look like, is it?" And my mom says, "No." That has stuck with me all my life. So I was very fortunate going into, adolescence and adulthood with the understanding that real women don't look like that, which also means what? Real men don't look like that either. So definitely, that was a moment. Someone I watched college, it was Joey Swole. Yeah. Yes. I love him, Charlie. I do. I love him. He is so on it. I love the ones that he does where he is, where he's like, yeah, I like the positive ones when he sees something that, expresses what gym culture actually is. Like, those are my favorite. But yeah, he does a really good job of trying to encourage people to exercise, to get into shape, to be healthy, and not judge and not bully. And when I see videos like that, all I think is like that person being that way, they're the ones that need my help, right?
Yeah, I always think about this, and we'll wrap up here. We have the ACEs scale and the resiliency scale, and I remember learning that fewer number of resilient factors can outweigh a larger number of adverse factors, excuse me. And I think about that in our day-to-day interactions with people, that we don't have to solve everyone's problems, even if they're our clients. We don't have to be able to overcome everything. But man, those drops in the bucket and little bits of engagement and support and check in on one another and on those around us really do add up to mean sometimes enough. And Aaron, I appreciate you coming to share your insight on this, both from your lived experience and from your wide range of professional experience. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us and talking to us and facilitating this discussion. And to our participants, thank you guys for attending and staying over. I want to give a recommendation for something along this line that I really enjoy a lot, which is a documentary called The Mask You Live In. It's free on YouTube, I think. It's hard to find in other places. It was a full release. You can still find the DVDs floating around. It's about masculinity and manhood, specifically in America. I really like it. It's really well done. It's poignant. It has a lot of good speakers, from clinicians to there's a former pro football player and coach on there. There's a number of different people, and they talk about, from young boys up to men, different things that we experience. And I found it can be really helpful because it puts experiences that a lot of us have into words and visuals. And a person who would never be able to say, "Hey, partner or family member or friend, well, this is an eloquent description of what I go through," they can nudge the person next to them and go, that thing that just showed on the TV, I went through, or I feel, or whatever. It's a strong recommendation for that one. It does have some adult language, so I would say, teenager and up. But it's a good one to check out and a good free resource to share with your family or with people that you work with. Aaron, man, I'll give you the final word. What do you want to plug? What should we know about SC Shares before we wrap up?
It's been a pleasure working with you guys. And, I would like it if you guys came to a CEU training. They're free, 100% free. Come talk to me. Talk to our trainers. Get to know what a peer supporter is. If you identify as a person with lived experience, come talk to us. We'd love to get you certified. I think more counselors, more therapists, more physicians would be able to help more people if we could identify as peers without the degrees in the line. Yes, Brittany. Brittany, get with me, because you and I are going to do something together. No worries, Sarah. Brittany and I are going to do something, Ross, and then we're going to get back with you, and we're going to have
Love it. We'll have y'all speakers next year. All right, guys. Everybody enjoy your Thursday. Thank you for tuning in. Give us some feedback in those after event surveys, so we know what you'd like to hear and see next year, because we're planning that stuff. And we hope to see everybody either virtual or back in person for our first one in January. Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.